Path of Exile 2 is less than a week away from the reveal of its first major patch since its early access launch all the way back at the beginning of December last year. By the time patch 0.2.0 Dawn of the Hunt goes live, it will be 4 months since the beginning of early access, so I'm expecting this to be a big patch with a lot of new additions, but also a lot of balance changes. I'll be covering what new content I expect to see in this patch in a future video, but in this one I'm going to be going over my predictions for 3 buffs and 3 nerfs for Path of Exile 2 Dawn of the Hunt. Let's get into it. We're beginning with the buff predictions, and prediction number 1 is maces. Now, maces as a weapon type really missed the mark, especially considering all of the dialogue we had from GGG prior to the Path of Exile 2 launch about how good melee feels in this game as a result of a lot of the new systems. For example, the new character rigging to improve animations, the addition of WASD to improve character control, and that you never lose control during a heated battle. But ultimately, the mace fell drastically short and is easily the worst feeling weapon type in the game currently. It's slow, very slow actually, which I think is exactly what they were going for, but sadly it's without any real payoff. Lots of the mace skills are locking your character into fixed time animations, which feels awful when you're getting swarmed by monsters, which is most of the time because a lot of the monsters are too fast and the skills take a long time to actually go off. For example, you can't really ever expect to just get a Sunder off without getting charged by mobs, and that's because even when you invest into attack speed, you still need to wait that minimum attack time out before the skill actually goes off, which in turn makes attack speed feel generally bad to invest into, because it has no impact on those animation locked time that's hidden in some of those abilities. Then on top of that, a bunch of the crucial damage wheels on the passive tree are littered with reduced attack speed modifiers. As if the fixed timers on some of these skills weren't already enough, you now need to spend even longer during normal attack animations as well. But the problem with the mace is not just that it's slow and not proportionally rewarding for how slow it is. It's also that the systems are simply not in place to support such a playstyle. There's no real melee-centric defensive layers to enable this kind of playstyle. No Fortify, no Molten Shell. It's really hard to see the vision here when being at range from monsters is just so much more beneficial in pretty much every aspect. Mace needs a lot of work, and I think we'll see some of that in Dawn of the Hunt. Moving on to prediction 2, and it's life and armor. Now these two are lumped together in the same prediction with good reason, because I really do feel that the issues with these are very much intertwined with one another. Life is simply the weakest resource in the game right now. It's overshadowed by the overtuned energy shield, but also by mana, considering that 100% mana before life exists in the game in the form of mind over matter. Life scaling in Path of Exile 2 is problematic. Not only do you not have the option to scale your hit pool on a life build like you do with Energy Shield by simply clicking nodes on the passive skill tree, but there's also a secondary issue in regards to armor, which is supposed to provide that extra defensive capability to enable this comparatively lower hit pool to actually function at a high level. But that's where the problems really begin, because truthfully, armor is actually quite good in the campaign of PoE 2. You can really feel its impact in mitigating those incoming physical hits. But as soon as armor is exposed to PoE 2's endgame, well, now you're in trouble. Not only do you have a significantly lower hit pool, and I really do mean significantly lower, we're talking 1/3 to perhaps 1/6 or even 1/7 of the hit pool of an Energy Shield based build when you only have life to rely on. But on top of having a much lower pool, your armor also just gets completely crushed by a lot of the incoming physical hits. Even from some white monsters, they'll be threatening enough to the point of almost one-shotting you. But the issues with armor run a bit deeper, because comparatively with Energy Shield and Evasion, it's simply the inferior defensive mechanic, where Energy Shield works to protect you against almost all damage types in the game, and Evasion will help you avoid any damage type as long as it's a projectile or a strike. Armor is exclusively used to protect against physical hits, and physical hits only, and it does a pretty poor job of it. It does nothing against elemental or chaos damage, and it does nothing against damage over time. And once again, similar to maces in the first topic, the systems that made armor useful in PoE 1 simply don't exist in PoE 2. There's no molten shell, and there's extremely limited access to additional PDR. I expect adjustments to both the scaling of life and the mechanics behind armor in patch 0.2.0. Now, the third and final buff prediction is unique items, more specifically endgame unique items. There's really not much to say about this one. There's a handful of extremely overtuned uniques, power, temporalis, ingenuity, and the likes, but the majority of unique items are absolutely terrible. There's not really a better way to describe them. They really are just that bad. They're not interesting, and they're incredibly weak. And coming from someone who absolutely loves unique items in PoE 1, this is a real shame. Now, GGG did make a bit of a weak attempt at a unique balance pass once they returned from their Christmas break, but it wasn't particularly fruitful. The large majority of those uniques are still far too weak. So I'm predicting a bit more of a dedicated balance pass on unique items in the Dawn of the Hunt patch, with a focus on items for endgame builds. Now we're moving on to the nerf predictions, beginning with nerf prediction number 1, Grim Feast. Now, Grim Feast is actually one of the main culprits for the state of balance in PoE 2 when it comes to life versus energy shield. In fact, if you look closely at what GGG tried to achieve with energy shield, you'd recognise that they intended for this defensive resource to be somewhat trivial to obtain in decent amounts, but for it to be significantly harder to recover compared to life. You can see this in the design of the recovery systems. There's no energy shield leech in PoE 2, and mechanics such as Zealot's Oath are largely changed to make setups such as Chaos Inoculation weaker compared to PoE 1. Meanwhile, the primary way of recovering energy shield, that being energy shield recharge, is incredibly weak baseline in PoE 2. You recharge just 12.5% of energy shield per second with no additional investment into recharge rate, and that recharge only begins after a period of 4 seconds without taking any damage to energy shield. It's obvious that they wanted players to problem solve energy shield's clear hurdle of recovery, and that's why the tree has a ton of support for investing into energy shield recharge. But GGG went ahead and shot themselves in the foot with the addition of Grim Feast, a skill that not only completely trivializes energy shield recovery during mapping, which is most of the game, but also skews the balance of life versus energy shield even more due to its overflowed ES mechanic, potentially doubling a character's energy shield. At the same time, Grim Feast also goes some way to undermining the Invoker's meditation ability, relegating it to pretty much be only useful in a boss arena type setting. Now, whilst I feel that energy shield is overtuned in terms of how much scaling you can obtain from the passive tree, I also firmly believe that if you remove Grim Feast from the equation, energy shield takes a massive hit, not just from the immediate loss of recovery and overflow, but also from the fact that builds would now be required to actively remove investment into maximum ES to go into ES recharge instead to solve their recovery. In patch 0.2, I expect Grim Feast to be reworked or possibly removed in an attempt to restore their vision for energy shield in PoE 2. On to nerf prediction number 2 is Herald of Ice. Now, I think this one is on the chopping block in the upcoming patch because it has almost single-handedly trivialized clearing mass amounts of monsters with minimal effort for a huge amount of builds. You have to look back at all the previews for PoE 2 and all of the discussion we had going into the release of Early Access, and you simply have to go away from all of that with the understanding that this is very likely not what they intended for PoE 2's endgame. Everything we've seen points towards more methodical and deliberate gameplay, but this one reservation skill is everything but that. It actively makes you interact with less encounters in maps because one action often clears multiple packs of monsters. Now, the fundamental problem with this is of course the mechanics of Herald of Ice. Even if this skill was to be nerfed by 50 or 75%, it would still end up doing pretty much the same thing as before, only you'd need a better weapon to compensate for the damage loss. So ultimately this would just nerf low-end builds, while those builds with big sticks, they'd still be popping off in high-tier maps. Meanwhile, they could increase the spirit reservation, but once again this doesn't really prevent the issues posed by this skill. And it also once again punishes lower-end builds, while high-end builds can still find that extra spirit to fit the skill in if they have good gear. Like Grim Feast, Herald of Ice needs to go back to the drawing board. It needs to be reworked, and that's exactly what I expect to see in the Dawn of the Hunt patch notes. Lastly, in the nerf predictions, it's number 3, Archmage. Now, Archmage might be the single biggest mystery to me in Path of Exile 2's early access build of the game. How on earth this skill made it to live with the numbers that it has is beyond me. Anyone remotely in tune with damage scaling, even someone coming from PoE 1 who's never played PoE 2, would be able to quickly recognise that this skill is completely absurd with the numbers it has. It's way over the top. To the point where non-mana stacking builds were actively using this skill just to get a bunch of extra damage, where any mana affixes on gear suddenly become a damage multiplier, and it opens up that new angle for damage scaling. Archmage should be good. After all, it's a 100 spirit reservation skill, but it should only be good for builds that strongly invest into mana stacking and mana sustain, and it simply cannot be as good as it is right now. So unlike Grim Feast and Herald of Ice, I expect Archmage to stay just as it is in terms of mechanics, but I do expect a very large numerical nerf to this ability. Think in the region of 60 to 70% less extra damage gained from this skill. Now that's it for the 3 buffs and nerf predictions for Dawn of the Hunt, but I do have a bunch of honourable mentions that didn't quite make it, so here they are, in no particular order. Green mentions for buff predictions, and red mentions for nerf predictions. So what do you expect to see buffed or nerfed in Path of Exile 2 patch 0.2.0 Dawn of the Hunt, the first big patch in Path of Exile 2's early access? Let me know by commenting below. Thanks for watching this video, and thank you to my patrons for your ongoing support. As always, stay tuned and stay safe.